Hi, leaders, and I'm here today to talk about a quick review of what we've covered thus far. This week we are moving quickly, and up until this point, you guys have covered Chapter 1, which is understanding leadership. It's essential that we understand that leadership is not a title, leadership is not authority, leadership is something you earn through influence. And how do we gain influence? It's by leading ourselves first, by being the kind of people that garner that kind of respect. And so this is why we see so many bosses in the world and so few leaders, right? Is that general principle is really not understood, that it's about maximizing the self. And that's why when you look at the leadership graphic that I posted in this week's learning module, you understand why this is so important, right? Leaders are effective agents for positive change. And if you look at that graphic, it's because that nucleus of that center circle of the graphic, it's focused on you. And we must understand that the maximization of you is where your power and influence comes from. First, for leading your own life, right? For achieving your own goals, for really setting yourself up for the most amount of success in all areas, but also then for having that influence go outwards, right? So the center of that circle, the nucleus, is you, but then it moves on to others, right? Through your interrelational skills. It moves on from there into groups, right? It moves on from there into communities and into the world, because like the butterfly effect, your influence really has no bounds. That reach can go as far and as wide as you want it to, and often in ways that you don't even understand. So make sure that you are familiar with that graphic. Make sure you understand the definition of leadership for this class. Make sure you're going through each of the course learning pages in each of the weekly learning modules and taking really good notes and understanding each and every principle before you move on. Okay, so we know leadership is not a position. Leadership is not about future you. Leadership is about present you. We must be working on ourselves now, right? Be walking through the world as leaders now in order to be ready for opportunities in the future. Often we think about leadership as, you know, a fancy corner office that we have earned, and now I have a briefcase and a power suit, and now I'm a leader. No, that is sort of the stereotype of leadership. That's not true and authentic leadership. Right? Leaders don't need to have big, deep, booming voices. We don't need to have broad shoulders. We need to be the kind of people that walk through the world in an expert way by leading ourselves first, and then we can gain the respect and influence of others. Leadership then is about self-leadership, about developing ourselves in a serious and dedicated way to be able to give that power to others. And leadership finally is about responsibility. It is not about power. Often we think and associate leadership with power. It is not. Leadership is a responsibility, and the further leaders get away from that, the bigger trouble the rest of us get into, right? So leadership is an art form. There's not one way of leading. We all lead differently, and we cannot be carbon copies of some other leader, right? And so what we're covering in the first part of this course is understanding how to maximize our own leadership, but then understanding how to kind of build a tool belt of different tools that we can use to put our leadership into practice in the world, right? So our leadership based on using those tools is something that we prove to others and to ourselves over time. It's not something that's instantaneous. It's not, oh, I checked marked these things and so now I'm a leader. It's about doing this, you know, consistently, and about building yourself, you know, in a really dedicated and committed way. Mindset is important, right? So thinking about leadership, walking through the world as a leader, and that means doing things that other people are not always willing to do. And this doesn't have to be complex or complicated. This can simply be just being more observant, being of assistance in ways that you know would make a difference, but that normally you wouldn't do. Getting outside your comfort zone, being willing to be uncomfortable, and really just taking a step outside of yourself and doing that with sort of and a curiosity, right? A pursuit of possibility. These things are essential for leaders, and so important. So continue to focus on these principles and understand how challenging and dynamic leadership is, which is why we have so few of them in the world. All right, then we moved on to the next chapter, which is chapter 5, leadership skills. This should be well covered because I did post a lecture about this, but remember to make sure that you are very clear on the 3 core leadership skills, right? So making sure you understand the difference between administrative, conceptual, and interpersonal, where you fall and thinking about how then these things can be applied when we're thinking about building teams, right? This is so essential. And again, remembering that these are a spectrum, right? That I can mostly fall into interpersonal, but that doesn't mean that I don't have abilities in other areas. But it is important for me to know that about myself, especially when I'm taking into consideration building diverse teams with different sets of skills. That leads us right into a perfect segue for chapter 6, which is engaging strengths. Now, this is the point where I want to make sure and underscore something very important here. Traditionally, we as individuals, as students in particular, when we go through today's modern educational experience, we typically tend to hear about our weaknesses. And this is important, of course, right? If you can't multiply at a certain grade, right, we need to make sure and get you to know how to multiply, or make sure that you know how to read fluently. These are essential skills, of course. However, we also tend to hear about our weaknesses in all different ways. And if you were to think back on your life, I bet you can name your weaknesses pretty readily, but your strengths is harder for you to identify, or at least it's harder for you to be honest about it, because it tends to make us feel immodest or arrogant if we talk about the things that we're good at. But I have news for you. The data tells us that leaders lead from a place of strength, right? So what your particular strengths are, and you have strengths in many areas of your life, right? Whatever your particular strengths are, our leadership fundamentals, right? The science of leadership tells us that we should be leading from that place. And this makes sense, doesn't it? I'm not going to try to lead from where I have deficits. I'm going to lead from the places where I know that I show up with something special to offer. Now, my job then is to make sure that I'm maximizing those strengths, right? So, you know, let's give an example. If you're pretty good at the guitar, but you don't really work on that skill, then think about the ability that you have to really become a master at the guitar, but you never took the time to actually build that skill. You're actually holding yourself back, and you're putting a leadership lid on your ability to rise to that particular level of expertise. As leaders, we can use this as a metaphor, right? Wherever we have our strengths, it's our job to develop them for ourselves, because that's where our particular talents lie. Now, should we ameliorate our weaknesses? Absolutely, so that they don't get in our way. But I can hire people, or I can build teams. If I'm in school, I can build a study group, or I can build a lab group where we can all share our strengths, and I don't have to be good at everything as a leader, right? We're working together, and we are better collectively than we are individually. So it's really important that we understand how to discover our strengths, how to maximize our strengths, right? And this is important for us to remember, that we then have to show up understanding that our strengths are for our biggest areas of growth, right? Which is sort of a paradigm shift of how we might have grown up or gone through school or been parented. But that we have then a responsibility to maximize those strengths, a responsibility to ourselves, but also a responsibility to our groups and communities, right? If I'm wanting to be the best member of my group or community or my business, then I have to be willing to maximize my special talents, right? And what we're doing for others when we do that is showing them how to do the same. There's a formula for this based on the social science, and that's your talent times the investment. And your investment is your investment in time in developing that talent. So it's talent times the time, your investment in building that talent equals your strength. Okay, and if you've heard of the name Malcolm Gladwell, he has done research that says it takes about 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. So if you think about things that you've tried to work on over time in your life, and how much time maybe you've spent, you know, working on video games, or how much time you've spent being a good listener to your friends, right? We have so many talents in so many different areas that we can really focus on bringing those talents to the leadership game, to our personal development game, and then we can be the best leaders that we can be for ourselves and for others. Okay? All right. A couple of things to note as you move through the coursework. Make sure you understand the science behind positive psychology. This goes right hand in hand with what we're talking about. Understanding that actually we motivate people better by pointing out when they're doing well. That doesn't mean that we don't address where there are places for people to grow, but we understand that fundamentally people will remember the criticism more than they'll remember the compliment. And so we have to get really good at catching people as leaders, get really good at catching people doing the right thing and building them up, so that way when we have corrections, we can do it from a place of value. We can do it from a place of sincere gratitude for what they bring to the table. They feel that, we feel that, and then we can add to the team together by correcting that situation in a way that feels beneficial for all, right? So make sure you understand the positive psychology. Make sure you understand growth mindset. Again, this goes hand in hand, right? So if you don't know what growth mindset is, this is a fundamental piece of understanding how we achieve success and achieve goals in life, is through a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. So make sure you understand the fundamental science of perseverance and grit through growth mindset. So this is this week, right? You've covered chapter 1, you've covered chapter 5, you've covered chapter 6. A lot because it's fast moving around here, right? But I believe in you. Stay motivated. This is going to go by quickly, and I am here for whatever you need help with.